Our discussion today is on the topic of how to build an Islamic identity, and so far I think we've tried to explain with some limited success, inshallah, what an Islamic identity is. Question that I have now is regarding the identity shifts, and we're focusing again on reverts especially because, as you know, you have a particular identity, you have a particular understanding, a particular role in the world. And then once you become a Muslim, that changes, or at least through that process of choosing to become a Muslim, it starts changing. And so you're not a totally different individual, but obviously there are many things in your mind and in your ideology that have changed. So the question is this: how long do you think it takes for a revert to recover from the major identity shift? Because it's going to be obviously the most prominent shift in somebody's life in terms of ideologically, and so how long does it take for a revert to recover from this identity shift?
I guess it would differ according to the individual. My personal experience was that it took me probably around 5 years to I didn't, not to say recover, but just to say acclimatize, and you know, just to feel truly comfortable. It took me some time because I was wrestling with trying to be as sincere as I could be to Islam, or to come to terms with the changes and the developments. You know, that is a very new and very different to the environment that I was brought up in. That was one aspect what I wrestled with, but also there were other dimensions like I hinted at before, that there are Islamic centers and Muslims I'd be coming in contact with that had a lot of cultural baggage, and it took a lot of time to sort of sift through that stuff and work out, well, this is useful, this is beneficial, this is Islamic, and this is some cultural stuff that I need to, put to the side. It's not necessarily bad, but it's not for me because it's not from my culture. It's not really relevant. So it took me, a period of time to dare I use that Darwinian word, evolve, into the Muslim identity where I felt comfortable and confident to the point where whether people did think, am I a Muslim or not, it didn't necessarily impact on me. I didn't feel,
yes.
if somebody didn't say Assalamu alaikum back, not saying not that I didn't care, but I accepted, this is something on their part, but
nothing wrong
I'm only
with you.
I'm only commanded to give the salam to the believers and just leave it at that.
So internally you had reached a stage where you had, if you like, built up for yourself an Islamic identity, and regardless of the appearance outside, you were comfortable with who you were. Good.
Yeah. I mean, I do think these things happen at different rates. The internal Islamic identity and worldview versus kind of navigating all of these social challenges and how one finally establishes one's external identity as a Muslim. With regards to building an internal Islamic identity, in terms of having an Islamic worldview, I honestly think that can be done quite quickly. Of course, the commitment can be immediate. I say, La ilaha illallah Muhammadan Rasulullah sallallahu alayhi wa alihi. And so after that, I'm committed to doing things Islamically. And realistically, you do need to know what you're doing. And if you haven't studied in depth before, then you might need to study some fiqh, some tafsir. I don't think, if someone is responsible about it, I don't think that should take more than a year or two, maximum.
You're talking about converting.
Yeah, converting and establishing an inner sense of kind of what it means to think Islamically, on at least a basic level.
On a basic level.
I don't mean, the ulama study their entire lives. I don't mean knowing everything, but just getting the basics down. And I do have to say that this is something we, human beings, need to take responsibility for. And I have found sometimes some people who come to Islam don't always take responsibility for their religious education. They don't seek out the books or the lectures or ask the questions. And, in a sense, it's good when people will come in the community and teach and educate, but we can't guarantee that that will happen, and we need to do it for ourselves. And if you do see someone who's been practicing Islam for a very long time, and is not illiterate, not sort of restricted somehow, perhaps if you haven't taken the opportunity to educate yourself, that is your responsibility. So that if that self-responsibility is there and there's no extenuating circumstances like paralysis or something, then that can be done quickly. But what I find with regards to all the other issues in society, at least with regards to my life and the lives of other people I've known, it's not just the initial life shift of conversion that is the trauma, so to speak, because in psychology they'll talk about after any sort of major life shift, you'll go through a sort of recovery period and either flourish at the end or go into some sort of extended crisis or just drop out of the whole thing together and quit, which would be apostatizing. That was, of course, the beginning of the challenge, but the real compounding factor, and this may be different for women too, was the instability that it brought along with it. Whether it was family issues, having relatives calling you at 3 or 4 in the morning to go crazy, financial issues, being, for example, a dependent one day and then the next day suddenly having to make a living, even though as a woman perhaps you weren't raised to take care of yourself and you don't know what to do. And then all these other issues in the community you mentioned. And I don't want to air too much dirty laundry, but realistically, there are some people in our community who look at new Muslims as a vulnerable population, and they want to get something done in their life, and they think perhaps this person can do it. One very common thing, which I think we did discuss some time ago, was green card marriages. Now, it may not be someone is coming and lying and saying, I want to marry you, but they may push the girl, say, well, just do it on paper for me. You know, and realistically these situations don't work out. I have known a lot of people in them, but it does throw your life off, all of these instabilities. And then at the same time, you're negotiating your identity with the rest of society. I mean, for example, I was working in a public school for a while, no other Muslims on the staff, very few in the school. They don't really know where to put you either because you're not Arab, you're not Persian, why are you wearing a scarf, where are you from, and perhaps you don't want to get into every single personal detail with everyone you come into contact with, especially given the authority issues of teaching. So I did find, I think it is a very long-term process dealing with all of these instabilities, and I've come to think that can take many, many years, maybe 5 years, or maybe more. But ultimately, it's not just about converting and becoming a Muslim. It's about dealing with the aftermath, almost.
Yeah. I think the 5 years that you've both mentioned, I'm going to concur and say 5 years. Although obviously it's not something set in stone. The reason why I would say this, I remember when back many years ago when I was looking for a spouse to marry, and I obviously considered to marry a revert because a revert is coming from the same background as me and so on and so forth. But I had this theory, and this theory was that if I were to marry somebody who converted 6 months ago or a year ago, that could be potentially quite risky because it takes a number of years, and I had this number of 5 in my mind, of years for somebody to know where that person is in relation to the deen. So they've converted because of the fact that they've understood the concept theologically or ideologically of Islam. But then how do you then negotiate and navigate through the trials and tribulations that life will throw at you by other Muslims, by non-Muslims, and your own demons within? And so this is why I had this theory of 5 years, and I think, alhamdulillah, in a different kind of context, you've confirmed that. But then the question comes of, which you've already been touching on, how do we, and you know, you might draw on your own personal experiences here, how do we negotiate this new identity in a kind of work setting? I remember speaking to one particular brother, and he was saying that once he converted, he put a sign on the notice board, Bismillahir Rahmanir Rahim. From this day onwards, don't call me George Spencer, whatever his name was. My name is now Abdul Kareem, Abdul Jabbar, blah, 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 blah. And anybody who calls me George, you know, I'm going to, I don't know, whatever, ostracize him and so on and so forth. You know, obviously this isn't the right way to go about it. And again, in his case, it was the
I took the same approach, man.
It's the direct approach.
Yeah, it's the direct approach, no doubt. But seriously, I mean, in these situations of work and friends as well, that's a very difficult one as well, because you have friends, and
the peer group could make or break. Sometimes make or break faith.
Exactly. And of course, you've done many things in the past, and when you become a Muslim, it's almost, for me anyway, a lot of my friends, there was nothing that I had in common anymore. Because all of the stuff we used to do back in the day, I couldn't do any longer. How do we negotiate these relationships?
When it comes to friends, I guess you just make new friends over time. Maybe not necessarily because you know, some things in life are not jagged, but they're kind of a smooth transition of we grew out of friendship and kind of grow into new friendships with new people. Sometimes people who are not necessarily Muslim, but they just have a different type of interest, which you may find some, you know, some similarity with. The one with the workplace is a very interesting one, and I think the best thing a person could do, whether they're born Muslim or whatever, is to get that one out there early. Get that one out, because I think workplaces are such a place where you become accustomed and acclimatized. You can always become, I don't use the word groomed, but you know what I mean, into certain type of behavior, whatever, or certain type of the office banter or whatever that may be. You put out that you're Muslim, it kind of puts people, people are aware generally, you know, in British society, you know, but oftentimes people are aware of at least some aspects of Islam, so it protects you from them not even initiating certain types of behavior, certain type of humor, certain types of discussion your way. Before
they invite you down to the pub on a Friday after work or something like
that. Yeah, or even just the type of conversations they would initiate on a certain level. Because you're a Muslim, they won't, you put it out that you're Muslim, they kind of, oh, sorry about that, and they don't want to come at you like that.
They won't send you the emails.
Yeah, you're out the loop.
Yeah, sure.
You know, it protects you from that. Whereas if you don't put it out, then you know, be Mr. Well, I'm Muslim, but I know something they don't know, and I'm wiser than them because I've read the Quran, and you know, you kind of keep things to yourself. You get bombarded with things or behaviors that is un-Islamic that you continually trying to challenge, and you're not just saying, look, I'm Muslim, so I'm not, you know, or this is not my thing, or you know, this is a haram, or you know what haram means? Well, let me explain it to you. You know what I mean? And use it as a soapbox, or you know, you put it out there as best as you can. Not easy. I can understand why people don't necessarily. So I wouldn't want anyone to see this and think and feel guilty or feel ashamed. But just for them to consider, you know, maybe it might make things practically on a practical level easier.
Yeah, of course, for women it is a little bit different if a lady does wear the hijab. That's kind of like a big flashing light saying, "Hey, look, I'm Muslim."
That's a statement.
I mean, I'm not sure this is necessarily the healthiest way to deal with things. The one thing I have learned in life is that, first of all, people forget. And when you go through a major life change, people are very interested in it. And it could be anything. When people get divorced, sometimes everyone's in your business. But after a while, they have their own issues in life, and they stop being so interested in what you're doing. You become old news. And similarly, eventually, if you start wearing a scarf and doing some sort of unusual rituals 5 times a day, people will get used to that too. And you just have to be patient during that process, especially if you don't necessarily like all of the attention. And after a while, people will forget that you were ever any different. And if not, people also move on. Coworkers come and go. You leave your job, you get a new job. Friends, like you said, they come and go. I mean, I look back at the people I knew growing up, and I mean, I think this is just nowadays society. Unless you live in a small town and you really don't leave, I don't interact with my classmates, most of them from university or high school, but very few of them. You know, now that we have Facebook, a few more, but mostly they're not part of my life anymore. And when you come to a company or a group of people, a neighborhood as is, people will treat you differently. If I walk in, do the job interview, and I'm a Muslim, there will be a tendency to accept that, whereas if you make the change, they may not really be sure what's going on and if it's legitimate. And so that just comes down to patience. With regards to friends, though, of course, one of the most important things is to try to surround ourselves with friends who are good influences. They may be Muslims, they may not be Muslims. Obviously, not every person who identifies themselves as a Muslim is a good influence. You know, you have to weigh personalities. And, I mean, yeah, it can be painful to lose friendships too, but, you know, if they are truly a good friend and a good influence, they'll go with you on this. And if not, then they won't. And, I mean, I know I've had to kind of move away from friendships just because that
may not be helpful.
It was almost, again, it's the legitimacy issue. They kind of couldn't accept me as a Muslim. Perhaps they just weren't able to conceptualize what that was. I think one of the most revealing things to me personally was a friend of mine from my childhood who was a very practicing Christian, and she wrote a story as an adult. And of course, I'd lost touch with her mostly. But she submitted it to a magazine, and it was about how her friend in high school became a Muslim through her eyes. And of course, she didn't say any of this, so I had no idea what she was thinking, because I kind of learned to keep quiet about the Islam thing and not bring it up. You know, but you know, she remembered one of the most, I think, touching parts was she said she was in her room praying to God, you know, please bring her to Christianity and accept Jesus. And she said she got a voice in her heart saying it's okay for her right now to be a Muslim. And then after that, she said she stopped, you know, kind of bugging me about it. Which on the one hand, I was genuinely moved that someone cared enough to write a story like that about me and how she perceived that part of my life. But on the other hand, much of what she perceived was very much wrong, and she wasn't getting what was right in my life. And ultimately, I never realized how deeply she disapproved of the decision in my life, and that hurt too. So it is tough, but life is hard.
Yeah, of course. Now we keep talking about this identity shift and, you know, this, if you like, process of stabilization where somebody, if you like, you find your footing in the world. Why, some people might be listening to this and thinking, what on earth, why on earth are they talking about this? What, in other words, what I'm asking is, why is it important that somebody who converts to Islam goes through this process of stabilization of this identity and understands their place, understands the Islamic identity and understands their role or their place therein within the Muslim Ummah?
Well, psychologically speaking, according to psychological theories, which of course you're more qualified to discuss, but I do think there's a lot of truth to these, you do need to answer your basic identity questions before you can commit to things, such as a marriage, such as a career. You need to have a sense of who you are, where you're going, and what that means. And if that doesn't get resolved, it's going to cause you problems throughout your life. It's a fundamental thing the human being needs to do, perhaps several times throughout their life. And I mean, I think I've looked at some of these theories and realized they do explain a lot about sort of what people who come to Islam go through, and that it's not necessarily unique to converting to Islam, but it's just, it is part of having a shift. You know, one thing they say is that when you undergo some sort of identity crisis or challenge, you need to take time out and you need to figure out who you are. And I look back in my life, for example, when I was in university, for example, before that I had not been allowed to interact with the Muslim community. So I had a strong personal Islamic identity, but I wasn't necessarily clued into what was actually going on with the Muslims around me. And so, you know, I kind of had an explosion of going to every MSA meeting and every lecture and every masjid, which was good for me at the time. I learned a lot. But I remember one of my classmates, who was from a very traditional Pakistani family, you know, very well raised, picked up the Islamic identity very early on her way to medical school. She said to me once, she said, you know, you have to stop spending so much time at the MSA, because the way you're going to serve the Muslim Ummah is by studying. So basically, you know, quit staying up late, quit missing your classes, do your homework. And she said that, but I wasn't quite sure. And now when I look back, I realize that, by the way, do your homework, you know, go to class, you know, you do need to survive. But I realized as kind of a human organism, my primary need at the time was to firmly establish my place in the world, in the non-Muslim world, in the Muslim world, inside myself, and that had been a little bit delayed to my circumstances. And anything else was very much secondary, and if that didn't get done, then nothing else would be getting done. And I think it's important to kind of have some patience with that and recognize, again, this is something that needs to happen from inside, and we may need to take time out of things that other people may be doing without a problem. You know, they may have their careers and their families, but dealing with the identity issue sometimes needs to come first.
Yeah, I could very much identify with that, and you know, recall there were times in my life when, you know, that's all it was about, is going to the next Islamic meeting, the next lecture, when to set up a stall, to be given dawah, to meet somebody, or somebody who knows a friend of a contact who might be interested in Islam, so we've got the Quran in hand and we're going to go around to their house and meet them, and it was like that all day, every day, because it was just, couldn't get enough. But, you know, over a period of time you acclimatize, and you have those interests, but it's in a more balanced way, but it's almost like you just need to go through that and quench that thirst and just get, you know, it's with the zeal.
Yes.
With the youth and with the Islam being such a powerful phenomenon, you know.
Definitely. Women. Again, we're talking about the identity or Muslim identity or the shift in identity. Sometimes you find, as we were discussing off air, where, for example, a woman becomes a Muslim and within 2 months sometimes 2 weeks of becoming a Muslim, she's married, you know, in the community, she's been married to somebody from wherever. Is this a dangerous ploy based on this theory that you had, or I suppose the three of us have, of this 5-year plan? Should we pass a law? Should a law be passed that anybody who becomes a Muslim, a female especially,
especially a woman, needs to be protected
should not
from
be married despite her age and unless she's been a Muslim for 5 years?
I know you don't mean literally a law, but I think there should be some kind of understanding or something of that nature where this is a person's given, a woman in particular is given time to acclimatize, find herself, you know, and adjust. I don't think that somebody who is born in a Muslim family would meet somebody and marry them in 2 weeks. So I don't think it should be. This should be something that is kind of pushed on women that become Muslim. Like, you know, she's available now. We got to, you know, marry her off. Why? What for? What's you know? I don't like the sound of that. That may happen in individual instances, and you know, that's something that happens. Maybe they're women, they're intelligent, they have their own mind. So am I being a bit too protective? I'm not respecting their own self-determination. That's one thing. But when it becomes a trend, when it's kind of like a common theme in a culture or amongst the people, then, you know, I don't like this. It doesn't sit well with me. It doesn't sit well with me. I think that you know, the sisters that come into Islam, they have a bigger challenge in some respects, because they are immediately, if they're adopting, you know, as much of the Sharia as is liked or as possible, they will be out overtly Muslim straight away. They're flag bearers for Islam.
Yes.
You know, and the Western woman, the non-Muslim Western woman, is a bigger respect and a different way. The flag bearer of Westernization, and you know, because when they was talking about Islam and freedom and that, the dress sense always is we're going to get them out the burqa, we're going to get them back in the burqa, we're going to get them out the purdah, we're going to get them back in the purdah. The woman is always you know, this battleground where this thing is played out. So I think the sisters need a little bit of time. You know, they need maybe an older sister or a wiser sister, but somebody that's like that auntie figure or that mentor that can kind of work with them and keep some of the, you know, the well-meaning maybe, but you know, some of the, you know, brothers just you know, back off a little, let a little bit of cool air get the sister, and let her, you know, she can marry in time. Marriage is a big thing, you know. They say marriage is an institution, and some people say so, you know, so is Broadmoor, you know, like, so just, you know, give her a little time, you know.
You make it sound like there's no women in the community. Everyone's going to be so excited if there's one, but
it tends to happen that way sometimes.
When the sister's getting married in 2 weeks, or she's been approached in 2 weeks of conversion, then you think, and there no women. There is plenty of sisters, so you know, just
and of course, Sister Min, your sister. So from a sister's perspective,
well, I think you do need to look at this from both sides, like most questions. I mean, everyone has different psychological needs, and I'm not even getting into hormones and the biological clock and the fact that women can't always wait, say, 10 years to work out their identity issues when they're 40, and it'll be difficult to have children. Some women do need to have a man in their life, and they need to have a family, and they may have lost their family support, and they can't handle being on their own. And so, you know, I wouldn't criticize someone who really just kind of needs to substitute for what they've lost or needs stability. I mean, to be quite frank, I've known women who were kicked out of their houses, who didn't have employment skills, and got married so they weren't living on the street. Of course, it's good if the community can help financially, but, you know, marriage is a rather time-tested historical solution to homelessness among women. And I'm not saying they're bad marriages, really. Well, especially for ladies. On the other hand, I mean, I would have a couple cautions. One is you really need to know what you're about before you get married. And especially there's basic things like madhab, Sunni, Shi'i, what do I believe, am I a Wahhabi? I mean, I recall when I was going through the Sunni, Shi'i thinking thing, I think it took me about 1.5 years to kind of work through that. You know, I was a practicing Sunni, but I was very open to Shia Islam. I was open to the imamate. I wasn't sure. And I had the opportunity to marry a very Salafi imam of the masjid.
MashaAllah.
And I was encouraged because being on my own, you know, not having family who was around me, but realistically that would have been a very poor choice, becoming Shi'i. I'm sure the marriage would have ended very quickly, you know. And so that probably would have just caused more problems.
And of course, maybe not in your case, but for some women, they tend to then, their choice is heavily influenced by who they marry.
Yeah.
So maybe if you, again, not in your case because I know you quite well, but somebody else would have said, well, even though I found that imamate stuff quite interesting, but my husband's, you know, this way inclined, and
Yeah.
I'm going to go that way.
Yeah, so I do think you need to settle these basic issues of identity, and it doesn't need to be years. I mean, even months can really do wonders. And like you're saying, the value of having someone wise and caring in the community who can give you genuine advice and say, okay, let's look at the reality. Maybe you're at 35, you're getting less marriageable, so you should marry soon. But is right now the right time? And of course, Islam encourages marriage. It's not healthy to delay it forever. But on the other hand, the identity issues. And I do suspect for most people, when we really need the space, we make space. I really don't think I would have married during that time period of my life, because it was actually extremely important to me to work out the Sunni-Shia issue. And that was really what I put most of my energy in, as opposed to going to school or doing other things, which I should have been doing. And even psychologically, like I was saying, they say you can't really commit without a strong sense of identity. And then once that sort of thing was resolved, it was easier to look at other issues in life. Yeah, I think it's good just to give oneself time and acknowledge that one is going through a change, and am I ready yet? And as you mentioned, it is sometimes a different situation if someone then takes on an identity because they marry it or they're kind of instructed in it, when it doesn't come from within.
Yeah, definitely. Unfortunately, as much as I'm enjoying this conversation, sadly we've come to the end of today's show. Inshallah, in the future we can pick up on some of these issues and many others as well. And hopefully you've learnt a lot by watching the show this evening. Assalamu alaikum.